All right, so this is the part two follow-up video here. So, as I mentioned, I had a bunch of several opportunities to spend some time with President Carter when I was working at Habitat for Humanity as an international partner, which is kind of like their Peace Corps version, working with the families. And so we had to make sure that families were selected that met the criteria that Habitat had put forward, especially with the Carter project. It was pretty high profile at the time there. It was the first time that Habitat for Humanity International ever had a project like this with President Carter outside the United States. So that was in Hungary, in Vác, city of Vác, VAC, in Hungary. I guess it was August of '96 or something like that. I believe it was August. But so one of the cool stories, President Carter, like basically when he was speaking in front of crowds, in front of cameras, the media, I was his interpreter. So I would stand next to him on stage or whatever and interpret him as he spoke. So in front of the crowds there, it was a little intimidating because I had never done that before, other than in like church settings. But it went quite well, and so one day I was walking by the site, and I was always usually pretty close by the Secret Service, knew who I was, so I was able to, walk right up there anytime. But he said, Steve, this family, he was working on the house for this particular family, they wanted an American style kitchen. So all the houses at Habitat were already like pre-designed. The wood was already, pre-cut and everything. But they wanted a board in between. They wanted an American kitchen. So they had to get a board between the kitchen and the dining room. They wanted to cut a hole in the wall. So in Hungary, it wasn't like you just go to Home Depot and pick up wood. So we had to go to a lumber yard, a wood milling place. So he's like, go, let my agent know that, I want to leave in like 15 minutes, and let's go and get this board cut. Let's find this wood. So I let them know that the president asked to go. And so we ended up going, and I got to sit in the vehicle with him and drive. I think we had two Suburbans we drove in, and drove to the wood, the lumber. It wasn't a lumber yard. It was basically a place where they process wood mill. And we walked in there, and everybody was just shocked. President Carter's walking in. And so I explained what we needed. They showed this big hunk of wood. The workers, put these hooks on them, and they dragged it in the back to this. There was just a room. It was probably like a 50 by 50, 50 by 100, huge steel building. It was basically, the two workers brought the wood in, put it on the table, and I was there with the president, and there was a couple of guys with Secret Service agents with firearms, and we got the board cut, and I was standing there on the opposite side of the table from President Carter as we planed this board. I guess he was there for about 15 minutes cutting this wood, and he was a carpenter by trade, so he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was operating the machinery, and they made the board very smooth, cut it to spec. And I'm just standing there, just kind of like, just kind of in shock. I'm sitting here with the former, leader of the free world. When I was like 5th, 6th, 7th grade when he was president, and we were planning a board together in Hungary. And he was just asking me all kinds of questions about Hungary, and I was trying to answer to the best of my knowledge. And we spent about, it was like half an hour, 45 minutes on that little excursion. Got the wood. He shook the hand of the owner of the mill, and the guy's like, I'm never going to wash my hands again. And so that was one story. Another cool story, he says to me, Steve, where is a really neat place to eat here in Vác? And I said, well, I know one spot. It's a pizzeria in the downtown square, but it's underground. So I guess this must have been, something that they had used, almost like a cave, but it was an underground restaurant. And he's like, well, make arrangements for us tomorrow to have lunch there. I said, okay, no problem, Mr. President. So I went to the restaurant. I let them know that President Carter would be here the next day. We need a reservation for about 15 people, and they didn't believe me. And anyway, lo and behold, we showed up the next day, and I was driving with Mrs. Carter and President Carter in the same vehicle, and sitting with them. He's like, okay, now give me a tour of the city. So I gave him, whatever. I was giving him play-by-play of what we were seeing driving by, and then we walked into the place, and the restaurant owner was, "I'm so sorry, I didn't believe you." I said, "Well, see, I told you President Carter was going to have lunch here." The most profound memory, and this is something that is just, I'll never forget it. So he took a break from the construction one day, and he decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to walk down to the Danube. He walked down to the Danube, and a man met him. I just came out of his house, is in a shack basically, and this man, I recognized him because he had come to some of these meetings that I had scheduled in town. Unfortunately, he didn't qualify for a Habitat house. He was a single dad with one kid, and they were looking for married couples with at least 2 children for this project. So, and he called out to the president and said, "President Carter, sir, will you join me for lunch today?" And President Carter walked over to him. He said, "Well, I can't do it today, but you know what, tomorrow," and they scheduled the time. He goes, "I will come back tomorrow and I will have lunch with you." And the man said, "Thank you, Mr. President. I will see you tomorrow at whatever, 12:30 or whatever the time was." And the next day, President Carter said, "Okay, well, we're going to walk down together." He's like, "Go let them know." And I told his head agent that we're going to go walk down to have lunch with this at this place. I guess they had checked it out or whatever. So no cameras. It wasn't a photo op. It was just, President Carter, 2 or 3 agents, and myself. We walked down to this house. I guess 1 guy or 2 guys stood outside, and then 1 agent was inside, maybe 2. And we sat down in this man's, in this shack. It was a very poor house. They had dirt and linoleum floor in there, and he had made a fish stew, probably some fish that he had caught from the Danube. And we sat there. I actually didn't eat, so President ate, and the man, and he just told him his life story, and President Carter just listened, asked some questions, and it was just it was a very surreal experience just to listen. He didn't really need to do that. It wasn't for any of the cameras. It wasn't a photo op, and he just sat in this poor man's house and listened to his life story, while this guy fed the president a bowl of soup that he had made. I don't know. So say what you want, and maybe he wasn't the greatest president or whatever, but just a real humble, good guy, and God bless him.